have these different tracks that will take all your information to your central nervous system and to your brain, and from your brain back outwards, right? So because of that, we can divide the fibers that are going in your cranial nerves into two, right? Afferent fibers and efferent fibers, right? So afferent fibers means the information that are coming towards your central nervous system, right? So basically your sensory information. So you have your general sensations, right? That means all your, touch, pressure, all your vibration, and you have this light touch and everything. So you have your general somatic efferents, right? So somatic means the structures that are kind of related to your body wall, we say, right? So basically the somatic efferents means the general the sensory information that you can think of, right? But so that was the case for your spinal nerves, right? So spinal nerves basically took your touch and all these others, pressure and proprioception and everything to your brain. So cranial nerves also will do a similar thing, because now cranial nerves deals with the stuff that is to do with your head and neck. So the cranium basically, right? So they will take the touch, pressure, the information from your, the touch from the face, right? Your maybe your ears, right? Forehead, right? So these things will be taken by your cranial nerves. So they are the afferent information for your cranial nerves. So the general somatic afferents, the basic afferents. But the special thing about the cranial nerves is, other than these somatic afferents, right? Other than these general somatic afferents, you have special somatic afferents also, right? What are these special somatic afferents? Right? They are your special senses, right? You know your special senses. You have your vision, you have your hearing. You have been learning this from small days. You have your vision and smell, hearing, all these things. You have special senses, right? So those are dealt with your cranial nerves, because hearing is done by your ears, right? Vision is done by your eyes, smell and taste, nose and your tongue, right? So everything is there in your head, right? So you can't be having spinal nerves for that. So these are dealt with your cranial nerves. So remember, other than the general somatic afferents, you have special somatic afferents, and also the smell and taste, you call them special visceral afferent, right? So you can imagine them as they are dealt with your nose and tongue. So they are somewhat visceral structures, we can say, right? Chemoreceptors are involved and stuff. So they have classified these two under special visceral afferents, right? And the others are your special somatic afferents. Okay. And you have your normal afferent, right? And also you have a general visceral afferent component also. So the main thing that you have to understand is these things, right? We'll discuss more in detail later. So we'll go to efferents now, right? Efferents means your motor component, right? So what did you see in this spinal nerves now? So usually your spinal nerve efferents are your skeletal muscle, right? The motor nerves, right? Motor neurons will go and supply your skeletal muscles, and that was your efferent. And also you can't forget the other efferent, which was your smooth muscle, right? So now your skeletal muscle component, right? So you call them the striated muscle, right? So your skeletal muscle component is basically, they call that somatic efferent, right? And your smooth muscle component, they call it the visceral efferent, right? So you can think of it as all your smooth muscle stuff, right? Your bladder and all your GIT, the alimentary canal stuff, and your pancreas and everything, these ducts and glands, right? They are visceral inside, right? So that's why you call them visceral efferent, right? So you can send information out to your skeletal muscle in your arms and legs and everything, and you can send your information out to your smooth muscle in your bladder or GIT or anything, right? But here we are dealing with cranial nerves, no? So what are these difference when it comes to your cranium? So what are the striated muscle? What are the skeletal muscles in your cranium region? So you have the skeletal muscles of your eye. So you can move your eye in. So something like that you can think about. No. Also you have basically many other striated muscles that you can think of, right? So what are the visceral efferents, right? What are the all these autonomic efferents, basically ducts and glands, your smooth muscle structures in your cranium region, right? You have your lacrimal gland, you have your salivary glands, everything is there. So basically you can relate that to your cranial nerves also. Now here, the special thing about cranial nerves here is here also you have a special efferent, right? So this, what is this special? They call it special visceral efferent, no? So they don't have a special somatic efferent. So nothing to confuse yourself. Just know that there is a special component. So this special component deals with, you remember your all these branchial arches. You learned about this arches in embryology in your development section. I got this table here. These pharyngeal arches and pouches and clefts and everything. So here, these arches give rise to certain muscles. Ne? These arches give rise to muscles. So you can see the mandibular, the first arch, right, will give rise to your muscles of mastication. Right, the second arch will give facial muscles, ne? Muscles of facial expression. So these muscles also need an efferent supply, ne? Right? So that supply is dealt with by this special visceral efferent component, right? So branchial arch muscles. So whenever you see this SVE, special visceral efferent, just think that those are the fibers that are supplying. Now, if you are talking about a certain cranial nerve, and that cranial nerve is supplying these pharyngeal arch muscles. For example, if you're talking about the mandibular nerve, which is coming from trigeminal, that mandibular nerve will supply these muscles, ne? Temporal, temporalis, and this masseter and pterygoids. So that those muscles are supplied by this special visceral efferent fibers, right? So when you are talking about this particular nerve, which is the mandibular nerve of the trigeminal nerve, that will have this SVE component. So I just basically went through this overview of what kind of fibers are there, right? So we'll quickly just summarize. So basically you have your sensory information, right? You have your general sensation, right? Your somatic means the general ones, right? So you have your somatic afferents, general somatic, the general ones, right? So general somatic afferents. And then you have your special ones, special somatic afferents in your cranial nerves, right? Hearing, balance, and everything. And then efferents, you have your general somatic efferents. That means your skeletal muscles, right? Just like your spinal nerves did, right? This one also will have that. And then it will have your fibers that will supply your uh, autonomic uh, components, right? So that is your general visceral efferents. And then you will have the fibers that will supply to these very specific structures that are made by your pharyngeal arches, and that will uh, be supplied by your special visceral efferents. So now, with this very this table in mind, right? Just this is just to make it easier for you to kind of like classify these nerves, huh? So with this in mind, we will now go to nerves one by one, and you can see now the next question that comes to your mind is, how are these fibers arranged, right, in cranial nerves? That means, like, will one nerve contain this one only, will one nerve contain this one only, is that so? Now the thing is this: there is no hard and fast rule as one nerve should contain only one kind of fiber. Did you understand? So there are certain nerves, right, which are specifically carrying fibers which are sensory afferent ones. There are nerves that are carrying fibers specifically for motor functions, carrying efferent fibers. Also there are nerves that carry both sensory and motor components, right? Just like your spinal, eh? So You remember how the sensory fibers came from that dorsal root, and the motor fibers came from the ventral one, and they got together to form the mixed spinal nerve. Similarly, cranial nerves can also be mixed, but cranial nerves can also have only sensory. Cranial nerves can also have motor. So I'm trying to make that connection here, right? So you can see some cranial nerves are only sensory. That means they will have only these afferent fibers, whatever the type, right? Some are motor, that means only efferent. Some are mixed, that means both are there. So when it comes to these sensory ones, very simple, no? We can quickly deal with these. Motor also fine, right? But when it comes to mixed nerves, we have to kind of, it's a bit complicated because we have to look at in two angles, right? You have to look at how the sensory fibers are going, and how motor fibers are going, whether they are general somatic ones, or likewise you have to look at it. Now this big table is there, we'll come to it in the end, right, to kind of summarize. uh, Now another very beautiful connection that we can make about these cranial nerves with the spinal nerves that you already know, right, is this, right? So now up to now what you know is there can be a sensory part, there can be a motor part, or there can be both in a cranial nerve, right? So the funny thing is, right, actually the good thing about this is the motor part and the sensory part of cranial nerves are basically the same as in the spinal nerves, right? Like let me show you. So just remember, just try to recall your spinal nerves part, right? No, I'm also trying to recall, right? So let's look at the motor part, right? So what are the basic components? Now think of your spinal nerves. You had a upper motor neuron, right, and a lower motor neuron, eh? So your upper motor neuron just comes down. What is that? Corticospinal tract. No, it comes down like this. There is a decussation also. It comes down, and then it will synapse with the lower motor neuron, and it will come out. So what do you have basically? Upper motor neuron and a lower motor neuron, right? So that is your basic spinal nerve. But cranial nerve also will have the same thing: upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron, right? And it will synapse in the brainstem. Now, spinal nerve synapsed in the spinal cord. This will synapse in the brainstem. So it's basically like you have an upper motor neuron coming down, right? And it will synapse in the brainstem, and the lower motor neuron will go out. So there is some kind of nucleus here, a motor nucleus. So you can see, when you are talking about cranial nerves, we are always like talking about all these nuclei, it's motor nuclei and all these sensory nuclei. So motor nucleus is where these things synapse, right? Nuclei. So, so just like corticospinal tract in spinal nerves, right? For cranial nerves, you have corticonuclear tracts because the nerve is going from the cortex to the nucleus, right? So basically, now here they are just explaining the pathway, pyramidal cells. So pyramidal cells are basically in your cerebral cortex, right? Neuron, a type of neuron, right? Specialized neuron, and so they say precentral gyrus. Now what is located in the precentral gyrus? Your primary motor cortex, right? In front of the central sulcus, you have the precentral gyrus. So that is your motor cortex. So now we are talking about the motor pathway, so that's why it's the precentral gyrus. So your neurons will come from the primary motor cortex, so the precentral gyrus come down, just like your spinal nerves. No? You have corona radiata, but here you have the genu of internal capsule. That is the difference, right? And then it will come down and it will synapse at the cranial nerve nucleus, right? Okay. Now here, another special thing that kind of differentiates this with the spinal nerves is, now spinal nerves are basically, they have what? They have a contralateral subline. So you say a certain upper motor neuron damage happened, right? The side which is opposite to the site of damage is the one that is affected, the spasticity and everything. But different story for lower motor neuron. No? Lower motor neuron, anyway, the same site that is damaged will be affected. but I'm stressing on that upper motor neuron, right? In spinal nerves, there's a decussation and everything. So your upper motor neuron is basically coming from the contralateral side. Now, here also it's coming from the contralateral side, but there is a ipsilateral supply also. There's a ipsilateral supply also. So basically, uh, that's what they say here. Bilateral connections are present, right? So let's say there is a damage here, still another supply is there. So you will not be able to see big what you call presentation, right? Because another supply is intact, right? So this thing is special for motor fibers, motor pathway of cranial nerves, right? So if the unilateral corticonuclear tract is damaged like this, there will not be any abnormal presentation, abnormal symptom, right? Except if there is a bilateral or there is a lower motor neuron damage. Then if there is a lower motor neuron damage, anyway there is a issue. Hari. Now motor pathway clear neda. Okay, now there is a small exception to this. You will learn in the next bat, right? This thing is not there. That means this dual supply is not there for your facial nerve when it comes to the lower part of the face. Upper part of the face is fine, right? Lower part of the face, this dual thing is not there. Only the contralateral is there. Hari. Same thing for the hypoglossal nerve that supplies the genioglossus muscle. Very specific what do you call exceptions. මේක දැන් ඔලුවට දාගන්න. That will solidify in the next bat because these two nerves will be dealt with in the next bat. Okay. So if one side damaged, you will not see a issue because another side is also supplying, except for these two. මේ දෙකට, if one side is damaged, you will anyway see a sign on the opposite side, right? Because contralateral is there. Alright, now we'll go to sensory arrangement, right? Right. So sensory arrangement is also similar to your spinal nerves. You will be delighted to hear that. No? So you just recall your sensory arrangement in the spinal nerve. Okay, how did that happen? You have something called the first order neuron. Some sensory receptor is there, and you are taking information from that sensory receptor into your spinal cord. Ne? Okay, and you have this, since this is a sensory neuron, what do you have? A nucleus and a ganglion, a sensory ganglion here. You will have that. And then that will synapse with the second order neuron, which will decussate and it will go up like this and everything. It's the second order neuron. Where does this second order neuron go to? Very important. You remember what do you call this? This is the spinothalamic tract. The in sensory pathway you remember in spinal cord, right? Spinothalamic tract. This will go to your thalamus. This will go to your thalamus. Now I'm telling this in detail here because later on it's the same thing. No? Other nerves, or all the nerves that we are discussing will have this arrangement. Then you won't have any difficulty understanding this. Okay, now thalamus is the relay point for all your sensory information. Every place now I'm talking about spinal nerves now. So your the touch and pressure that you can feel in your hands and arms and legs, everything will go to your first order neuron, synapse with the second order neuron. Second order neuron will go to the thalamus and it will relay that information there, right? Ventral posterolateral nucleus, no, VPL, right? And from there, it will go to your cerebral cortex. No, is that so? Right. So you have the first order neuron, second order neuron, and third order neuron. Now, cranial nerves also have the same exact thing, right? So basically, your first order neuron. So the only difference is that this information is coming not from your hands and feet, right? From your face and all the structures that are in your head and neck region, right? Okay. So axons. So first order neuron cells, axons whose cells are outside the brain. right? Basically, it's outside of the central nervous system. It's outside first order neuron, eh? Right? So now, what do you need here? I told you, you need a ganglion, right? Spinal cord also have a dorsal sensory ganglion, for the sensory neuron nucleus. So here also, for the sensory neurons, right, you will need a ganglion. So in cranial nerves also, you can see that you have ganglia for the cell bodies, right? So we have written here, which is equal to the posterior root ganglion of the spinal nerves. Okay, so right, so this ganglion might be ganglion might be in these cranial nerves. Your ganglion might be very prominent, like you will see in the trigeminal ganglion, right? Or sometimes that ganglion might not be very prominent because those ganglia might be inside the sensory organ, like in the nose, eye, or ear, not very prominent. Maybe let's say in the eye, you remember in retina, you have these ganglion cells. Now we don't have a very specific ganglion structure in there, no? Just a cell type called ganglion cells, right? So something like that. But sometimes you will have a big ganglion, like the trigeminal ganglion. So anyway, that's the first order neuron. Now the second order neuron, what will happen? Uh, it will of the central cranial nerve nucleus. So basically, it will. So here it will synapse in a sensory nucleus, no? Just like a motor nucleus here, sensory nucleus will be there. This is for the synapse. Then from there, your second order neuron will carry up, and it will synapse in the thalamus, right? It will cross the midline just like your spinal nerves, discuss it. And the third order neuron will start from the thalamus and terminate in the cortex. Now, we basically covered a big part where we understood how these things are arranged. Now, you can't be confused, right, when it comes to cranial nerves, right? Please don't be confused when they mention these nuclei, right? So, when they tell you the name, right, you should kind of be able to figure out why this nucleus is for, right? If it's a part of the motor pathway, of course, you will need a nucleus to relay the first order to relay the upper motor neuron with the lower motor neuron. If you are talking about a sensory fiber, of course, you will need a nucleus to relay your first order with the second order. And of course, you will need your thalamus, right? So you can't have doubts when it comes to these uh, core principles. Arinek? Okay. Now, so upper motor neuron, lower motor neuron thing is there, Hari. So first order neuron, second order neuron, then thalamus, from there, third order neuron. Those two are the main two pathways. So now you know about the fiber types in afferent and efferent. And now you know about the exact pathway of your afferent here and efferent here. Now, just to mention a small thing, right? Small thing extra, just so that you will be able to cover this more easily, is right. So I have just summarized this down here. Uh, so you have your motor nuclei, your general. So, Adevune, you have your motor nuclei. So these are this motor nuclei we just talked about. So upper motor neuron, lower motor neuron, synapse, right? So so we just talked about the normal arrangement, right? So the similar arrangement that you saw in the spinal nerves. In other words, your general somatic efferent, right? Your general somatic efferent, just like you saw in the spinal nerves, like for the skeletal muscles and your normal motor pathway, right? But what about this general visceral efferent? What about the autonomic component? Now, we didn't talk about this much in the spinal cord, right? This very specific arrangement of this, how these sympathetic, parasympathetic fibers, do they have nuclei and everything? We didn't discuss in spinal cord much in spinal nerves, right? But for cranial nerves, we talk about it very specifically, right? That is extremely important. So, your general visceral efferents, in other words, your autonomic, right? Just to make this easier, autonomic, right? I don't think anybody would refer to this as general visceral efference instead of autonomic, because this is the easier one. So your autonomic pathway, right? Here we discuss very specifically, right? Okay. Now I'll summarize that also. So your autonomics will also need certain nuclei, right? Your autonomic nerves, your autonomic neurons, right? Your autonomic fibers are also originating from these very specific nuclei. Okay, right. So whenever you have this GVE, your general visceral efferent or your autonomic fibers, whatever the nerve that carries them, right, should have a connection to a autonomic nucleus. Right. Now I have given you the ones, the autonomic nuclei that we have to know, right? Yeah, I think everything is here, I guess. So mainly, right, you have a nucleus called the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, right? Edinger-Westphal nucleus is there. So that nucleus will give the parasympathetic parasympathetic fibers to your, your pupil, right? No, basically that. And the other thing is the cranial nerves that we are talking about here, right, will mainly carry your parasympathetics, right? It will carry your parasympathetic fibers, right? The autonomics that we see in the cranial nerves, if we learn about, right, basically carry your parasympathetic fibers, right? Because the sympathetic fibers basically come from that, your cervical ganglion and everything that is there, right? But parasympathetic fibers are coming from uh, the brain stem, and they will go with your cranial nerve. Okay, right. So basically, you have Edinger-Westphal nucleus, which will give fibers to your cranial nerve number 3, which is the oculomotor nerve, and that will give fibers to your ciliary ganglion, right? And now you have your superior salivatory nucleus and the inferior salivatory nucleus, which are basically which basically give fibers to your salivary glands. Superior will give to submandibular gland. Inferior will give to parotid gland, right? Then lacrimal nucleus is there. Lacrimal nucleus will give information to your lacrimal gland, right? And then you have the dorsal motor nucleus of vagus. This will give fibers, autonomic fibers, so parasympathetic fibers to your all these viscera that the vagus nerve supplies to. Your heart is supplied by it and everything. Vagus nerve, that it's a main parasympathetic nerve, right, in the body, right? The vagus nerve gives you the major parasympathetic supply, right? It is a cranial nerve, right? So cranial nerves basically carry your parasympathetic, right? Because for the sympathetics, you have your sympathetic chain on either sides of the vertebral column, of the spinal cord, right? So you have your sympathetic chain there. But for parasympathetic fibers, you need something else. So that is the cranial nerve. So that will carry your parasympathetics. Okay, right. Anyway, so for parasympathetics, you need this nuclear, right? So when you go into very specific nerves, you will learn about this further. And also, from the autonomic anatomy, your parasympathetics also will need a ganglion. So you need a nucleus. So you have a nucleus for the parasympathetic, right? You have a nucleus. So a parasympathetic nucleus is there. Let's say, for example, you have Edinger-Westphal nucleus. You will see this in a minute, right? You have Edinger-Westphal nucleus. And from there, right, your preganglionic neuron will come. And near the effector organ, it will synapse with the postganglionic neuron. And this is your parasympathetic ganglion. You remember this name? Near the effector organ, you have a parasympathetic ganglion and everything. So that particular ganglion, parasympathetic ganglion, will also be seen in your cranial nerves. Because why? For one thing, cranial nerves carry your parasympathetic efferents, general visceral efferents, which are parasympathetics. Parasympathetics have a nucleus. So you see parasympathetic nucleus. Then the third thing is Parasympathetic nervous system should have ganglia close to the efferent organs, where the presympathetic and postsympathetic will synapse. So that parasympathetic ganglion will also be seen. Not in every, not in every cranial nerve, but in cranial nerves that have parasympathetic fibers. Cranial nerves that will carry the parasympathetic fibers. Hare So please understand these nice things, right? So basically, I'm summarizing this. So, Hare So finally, you have another type of nuclei that we discussed already. That is the sensory nucleus. This one over here, right? So you have your uh, afferent uh, information that will synapse there. Okay. Now overview, right? We learned about the types of fibers. We learned about the sensory arrangement, the motor arrangement, and sensory arrangement. The special thing is you have sensory nuclei and also the thalamus. And the motor arrangement, the special thing is for the somatic ones, you have upper motor neuron, lower motor neuron, and the motor nucleus. And for autonomic efferents, you have an autonomic nucleus, which is basically parasympathetic because cranial nerves carry parasympathetic. You have an autonomic nucleus and an autonomic ganglion, a parasympathetic ganglion. Okay, sympathetics ගාව ගන්න එපා because sympathetics you have a sympathetic chain and that chain will through the cervical ganglion will give you sympathetic information to the head and neck. You don't need cranial nerves for that. Parasympathetic වලට තමයි ඕනේ. Hari, okay. Now I hope you understood this. If you have any doubts, okay, you can unmute and ask or whatever because I can't see the chat. Okay. Right now we'll quickly go through this. Make it a loku වෙලාවක් යන්න because the nerves that we have today are actually quite simple. Now the first one is olfactory nerve. Right. Now olfactory nerve, olfactory means your smell. And now think smell is a sensation, right? So it has to be carrying afferent fibers, right? It can't be carrying efferent fibers, right? So it has to be afferent, right? So what is the type of afferent? Is it like a special one or a general one? Like so it has to be a special one, right? Because the general ones are the general afferents, the sensation like touch arameva. Right? So this has to carry a special one because smell is a special afferent. And also the other category out of the special afferents, smell and taste, I told you in the beginning, is a visceral one. So basically this will carry your special visceral afferent. Methane, see, olfactory. So this is how you kind of figure this out, right? So the fibers that are in the olfactory nerve are special afferent fibers, visceral afferent. Okay, now how does this work? So the olfactory pathway kind of I have this the other diagram also. Okay, I'll talk about it later. So the olfactory nerve, right? Basically, in order, although we call this a nerve, right? Although we call this a nerve, this doesn't structurally resemble a nerve, right? So we'll see why, because this is actually a uh, this when you say nerve, right? Uh, they are myelinated by Schwann cells and everything, right? But these ones, like the olfactory, so it's very similar to a tract, a nerve tract, than a actual nerve, because they say it's myelinated by oligodendrocytes, which are the myelinating cells in the central nervous system, not in the peripheral nervous system, right? Because if it's a nerve, it is a part of the peripheral nervous system. Cranial nerves and spinal nerves are part of the peripheral nervous system. However, now again they are saying they are not myelinated by the peripheral myelination like the Schwann cells. They are myelinated by oligodendrocytes in the central nervous system. So they don't resemble a nerve. They actually resemble some nerve tract in the central nervous system, right? By they, I mean this olfactory nerve and this optic nerve, right? Other than that, all the other cranial nerves are like nerves, right? This has been questioned, as I remember, in certain MCQ stems, right? Olfactory nerve and optic nerve, right? Now here also they have mentioned in your BAT also, right? In this BAT, there I found a small error in the sentence. Huh? It should be like this. So comparable to central nervous system, right? It because it's not comparable to a nerve or a peripheral nerve. So in central nervous system, you have tracts, right? So tracts are lined by oligodendrocytes. These nerves are also lined by oligodendrocytes, myelinated by oligodendrocytes. Okay, more than PNS nerve fiber, they resemble a central nervous system. So this is for your olfactory nerve and optic nerve, right? Anyways, how does this happen now for sensory? For a sensory nerve, what should you have? Sensory pathway. You have a first order neuron coming from your sensory receptor, relaying with your second order neuron, and the second order neuron will relay in the thalamus, and from the thalamus it will go to the cortex. First order, second order, third order, right? So now trust me, right? This arrangement, this sensory pathway is consistent with most of the sensory things, right? Most of the sensory fibers in your cranial nerves, it's consistent. It is there, right? But your first and your second nerve, your optic nerve and your olfactory nerve, they are kind of very small exceptions because you can't clearly see this first order, second order, third order. You can't clearly see, right? But you can kind of figure it out. Now we'll see how this works, right? So let's say in your olfactory nerve, how that happens is now your nasal cavity is there, like this. If you look from the front, your nasal cavity is there, right? And your nasal cavity has an olfactory epithelium. That means the epithelium that can sense your smell. So that's like this upper part of your nasal cavity, right? Now, in this olfactory epithelium, right, over here we get a bony plate, right, formed by the ethmoid bone, right, formed by the ethmoid bone. You can see this is the plate in cross section. This is the plate, right? It's called the cribriform plate because it has small holes like this. But if you observe your cranial cavity here in front, where your nasal cavity would be, you can see this plate. This is the roof of your nasal cavity, right? So there you have small holes, and through these small holes, right, you can see you have your olfactory cells coming up like this. You can see nicely, in the cell again, right? So you have your olfactory hair cells because they have some small olfactory hairs. So whenever a certain molecule that you smell come and dissolve in this mucus over here,
නාල්ලයි
right? Your olfactory hairs will. Oh, yeah.
අයි මේ අයියගේ ස්ක්‍රීන් එක මේ ගොඩක් පරක් වෙලා පේන විනාඩි 12ක් විතර පරක් වෙලා පේන්නේ රූම් එකේ
Ah, really?
මේ
Uh,
අයි 740 අයියගේ ස්ක්‍රීන් එක
මම
ටයිම්
කියන
එක
එක
එනවා
real time
ඔව් කියන්නේ රියල් ටයිම් එනවා
real time ඇහෙනවානේ. හරි.
ඔව්
දැන් මම මේක
මචං දැන් පොඩ්ඩක්
අයියගේ
හරි
ස්ක්‍රීන්
මේ
එක
දැන්
පල්ලෙහාට වෙත්
ඔව්
කරන්නකෝ.
ස්ක්‍රීන් ෂෙයා එක ඕෆ් කරලා
කරා.
එමත් දාලා බලුවොත්
මම දැන් පල්ලෙහාටත් කරා ඒක මේවා වුණාද?
නෑ නෑ.
නෑනේ. පොඩ්ඩක් ඉන්න බලන්න. දැන් කොහමද? දැන් මම ඔන්න පල්ලෙහාට කරා ආයෙත්
දැන් හරි
පේනවා.
දැන් හරි
දැන් හරිනේ.
දැන් හරි ඔව් හරි
හරි. Okay. මේ හරි. So I was talking about the olfactory pathway. So now on top of your nasal cavity, you have your ethmoid the cribriform plate formed by the ethmoid bone, and that cribriform plate has small holes, right? And through that, you can see that the olfactory cells are coming. No? Now, whenever a certain particle dissolves in this mucus, your the olfactory hairs will kind of detect that and will send the information upwards like this. Now, you have your olfactory hair cells, right? And they are synapses. So they are kind of like your first order neuron. Eh? You can kind of figure that out. You can make that connection, right? Now here, that's what I said. So this is a small exception. You can't clearly see the first order, second order, third order relationship. Now this olfactory hair cell will go and synapse with these very specific type of cells called mitral cells, right? So this is the main type that we talk about. Mitral cells. Also, there is this certain other tufted cell gelekutte. So these olfactory hair cells will synapse with mitral cells, and mitral cells. Now, mitral cells have an axon. So now that axon will go along with this structure, which is called the olfactory tract. Now, this big bulb-like structure is the olfactory bulb. Okay, these mitral cells and everything, the nucleus, the cell body is located in the olfactory bulb, like this. And the axons will go in the olfactory tract. Now, this is just like your first order neuron and second order neuron. Eh? Okay. But we don't say that. Huh? They are corresponding to that, but it's not very clear. Right. Now we'll come here. Right. Now I have moved the screen again. Huh? Now, olfactory cell coming and synapsing with the mitral cell in the olfactory bulb, and the mitral cell axon will go like this in the olfactory tract, and it will go to your cerebral cortex, the olfactory area, which is located in this region called the uh, uncus, uncus of the cerebrum, which is like a part of the temporal lobe, right? මේ ඇතුලේ තියෙන මේ කෑල්ල, right? It's not visible up to the outside, but it's part of the temporal lobe, like this, right? This green color one, here, okay? That's the uncus. So see, this is a anatomical, picture to just to visualize the relationship here. So you have your olfactory hair cells, and that will project into the bulb, and from the bulb, fibers will go through the olfactory tract to the cerebral cortex, the primary olfactory cortex. So now we didn't talk about primary, first order, second order, and third order here because it's not very clear, right? Because this doesn't resemble a nerve. This resembles a tract. Okay, so it's a bit different. Okay, I hope you understood this. Right. So here also, olfactory bulb. So first should come these things, no? But olfactory hair cells. So the hair cells will relay in the olfactory bulb. So, Arida, so they say the central processes of olfactory hair cells in the olfactory mucosa. These are the central processes. මෙතනින් මේ උඩට යන කෑල්ල තියෙනවනේ. Axon එක වගේ යාගේ. Axon is a process, no? So central processes. Axon එක වගේ කෑල්ල. Right? Now this is a sensory pathway, but did we see the thalamus? No, we did not see the thalamus. This is also a very important MCQ point. Now, this is a place where bad luck, I think we don't get the actual perfect example as the first one. The first example, the cranial nerve 1 and cranial nerve 2 are not perfect examples for these pathways. Huh? So, yeah, so here fibers don't relay in the thalamus. Right? Okay. Remember these. Huh? So, they don't resemble peripheral nerves, and also they don't, also olfactory pathway does not relay in the thalamus. Very special out of all the sensations. Right. එතකොට මෙතන olfactory
excuse me රහල්ලයි
tract එකේ something happens no? Oh,
excuse me ආයමත් මේ ඩිලේ වෙනවා දැනට විනාඩි දෙකක් ඩිලේ
දැන් මම මොකුත් move කරේ නැහැ
ඔව් මේ
මේ
අයගේ ස්ක්‍රීන් එකේ ටයිම් එක අපිට පේන්නේ 7:56 කියලා
එහෙමද ඒක ලොකු මේකක් වෙයිද දන්නේ තව ඒක ලොකුවට පරක් වුණොත් නම් කේස් එකක් වෙන්න ඉඩ තියෙනවා මොකද ඔයාලා බැට් එකනේ ෆලෝ කරන්නේ නේද
ඔව් බැටේ ෆලෝ කරනවා
ඔයාලත් මේ නෝට් එකනේ ෆලෝ කරන්නේ ඔව් ඒක තමයි මම ලොකුවට මම දෙයක් මේකේ ලොකුවට ලියන්නේ නැහැ මම ඕල්රෙඩි ලියලා තියෙන්නේ සෝ මම හරියක් දානවා තරුවක් දානවා ඉරක් අදිනවා වගේ සීන් එකක් වුණොත් මිසක් සෝ අපි මෙහෙම බෑ කරන් යන්න because මේ
ඔව්
ඒක
නේ
ලොකුවටම අවුලක් වුණොත් මට කියන්න
හරි
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 එහෙම ලොකුවටම අවුලක් වුණොත් මම වෙනම රෙකෝඩින් එකක් හරි දාන්නම් ඒක මේ මෙහෙම සාර්ථක නැත්තම් okay හරි I think it's the bad weather හරි so you can see that the olfactory tract divides into certain parts right so laterally it goes as the lateral striae so medially it comes to the medial striae right which will form your anterior commissure and connect with the opposite side right now what I mean is මෙතන නම් පොඩ්ඩක් අදින්න වෙනවා හැබැයි මම මේක දැන් ඇඳලා තියන්නම් එතකොට ඔයාලට පස්සේ ඒක ලෝඩ් වෙනවනේ so basically so your olfactory bulb is like this and the tract is coming like this right so you will have lateral striae then you have medial striae medial ones which will form your anterior commissure and it will connect with the other side opposite olfactory bulb I hope this makes sense right හරි ඊට පස්සේ එයා ගිහිල්ලා olfactory cortex එකටත් connect වෙනවා එහෙම right so that is the situation with the olfactory nerve so that is done so there is a small clinical point there now I told you, no, there is a ethmoid bone forms a cribriform plate where this mucosa lies olfactory mucosa if there is a certain fracture to that plate like anterior cranial fossa fracture right you will lose your smell right because you will lose your olfactory epithelium and you have bilateral anosmia because anosmia means you can't smell bilaterally both will be gone and yeah it's associated with CSF rhinorrhea they say because of course what is lying on top of your cranial cavity like what is lying inside you have all your meninges and there you have your arachnoid mater and your subarachnoid space and in that you have your CSF and because of this trauma other than losing your smell you will have that CSF also coming down from your nose because now you have fractured your plate and it has gone and damaged your meninges CSF is coming out of the nose so that is rhinorrhea CSF rhinorrhea so olfactory nerve done so this is a nerve where you have to kind of understand separately because this is not compatible with this not exactly compatible with what we talked about because we didn't talk about nucleus we didn't talk about first order second order and everything so yeah now we will go to optic nerve I hope this diagram is loaded huh? so anterior commission all this lateral striae and everything okay now we'll go to optic nerve now this is a very important nerve right so we will do 6 today huh? so ඒ හයනොත් ලොකුවටම තියෙන්නේ මේ optic nerve එකේ trigeminal nerve එකේ okay now we'll go to optic nerve so basically your optic nerve is again carrying very similar information to your olfactory nerve because that is also a sensation optic is also a sensation because optic nerve is carrying your visual information to your brain and it is a special sensation right it's a special afferent right but it's not a visceral one no? It's a somatic one visceral was smell and taste okay so special somatic afferent right now this one is also not compatible with that first order, second order thing, but you can figure something out. Now see, uh, right now you learned about the retina, no? So retina is where everything begins. Ne? So retina, you have at the bottom you have the photosensitive cells, your photoreceptors, and your photoreceptors are there like this, and photoreceptors will synapse with your photoreceptors will synapse with your bipolar cells, and bipolar cells will synapse with your ganglion cells. Now these ganglion cells will get together to form this optic nerve, right? So axons of the ganglion cells, axons of the ganglion cells. So now these ganglion cells are like the uh, the first what do you call you can't call that as the first order neuron. Also it's like more compatible with your second order neuron thing here, because you have another synapse here, ned. So you can think of this as the sensory receptor, the photoreceptor cell, you think as the receptor. So your bipolar cell is like the first order neuron, right? So the ganglion cell is like the second order neuron. So they are in a synapse in the retina. That is so no nucleus, just the retina. That is so your axons of the bipolar cell will come and form your optic nerve, right? So so here on the left side I have written neurons of the optic nerve and olfactory tract comparable to second order neurons, because this was there in Snell's, as I remember. So yeah, just a point, right? Just to compare, just to show that it's kind of compatible. These pathways are kind of compatible with this one also, right? We can relate. Here also we have the same issue, because the optic nerve is also myelinated by oligodendrocytes, so it's not like an actual nerve. It's not a true nerve. So it is more like a nerve tract, not a nerve, right? So yeah. So the most important thing that I need to highlight is you need to know this pathway exactly, right? Like the back of your hand, because they will ask you over and over again to write this, to draw this, right? Even in, I don't know, wherever you go, they might ask, right? I specifically remember even in the distinction viva, they asked they just to draw the pathway of the the visual pathway and the pathway of the pupillary reflex, as I remember. So everything is covered here. So please pay attention. This can come for the exam as well. Hari. So how the pathway is going? මේ දැන් මේක පොඩ්ඩක් මේ මට අඳින්න වෙනවා. ඒක පේනවාද කියලා බලන්න. Now is this, can you see me draw in real time? පේනවාද
නෝ
මං අඳින
ඒ
එක?
කාක්ෂේනේ මේ අපිට පේන්නේ අර මේ
කාන්ට.
ඇක්ෂන්ස් අර මේ රෙටිනා එකේ ලේයර්ස් අදින එක මම හිතන්නේ
right.
මේ මේ
Right,
වෙලාවේ
right,
පේන්නේ.
right, right. හරි. මට කියන්න ඕනේ මෙච්චරයි. මේ ඒ මං අඳින තැනට එහා පැත්තේ තියෙන මේ ඩයග්‍රෑම් එක, this optic
ආ
nerve pathway, the diagram is very important for the exam. හරිද? එතකොට මෙහෙමයි අපිට මේක සුදා මොකද කියන්නේ, අපි මේක රෙකෝඩින් එකක් කරලා දාමුද? මට ඒකත් අවුලක් නැහැ. That's not ideal, but සුදාම ඉන්නවද දන්නේ නැනේ. මොකද ඕගොල්ලෝ කියන්නේ? But will you watch that is the problem. සුදාම් නැද්ද?
මම හිතන්නේ සුදා මේ
මොකද
මීටින්
කියන්නේ?
එකේ නෑ අයියෝ.
ඕගොල්ලෝ මොකද කියන්නේ? මීටින් එකේ නෑනේ. තේරෙනවද? දැන් ඔයාලටත් මේ මේකක් තියනවා නේද? මොකද්ද මේ රිවිව් එකක්ද මොකක්ද තියනවා නේද? රිවිව් එකක් තියනවානේ. රිවිව් එකක් තියෙනවා and formative assessment එකක් තියෙනවා. What do we do?
මොටිවේෂන්ට් එක තියෙනවා
ඔයාලට
YouTube
මේ
එකේ.
මම මේක රෙකෝඩින් එකක්, ඔව් මම ඔයාලට රෙකෝඩින් එකක් කරලා දැම්මොත් ඔයාලා බලනවද? දැන් කොහොමත් most of them will watch the recording නේ.
ඔව් අය දැන්
I was
මගේ
told that the attendance will be also low. ඔයාලට මේ what do you think, is this effective? මම මේ කරන විදිය හොඳයිද? And
ඔව් අය ඒක නම් සිතුව අර මේ
right,
ස්ක්‍රීන්
එහෙනම්
එකට
මම
රියල්
මේක
ටයිම් පේන්න තියෙන නිසා තමයි පොඩ්ඩක් අවුලක් තියෙන්නේ.
ඕකේ මලි. මම මෙහෙම ඔයාලට හෙටත් මේ ඉෂුව එක තියෙනවද?
හෙට
හෙට හවස.
නෑ හෙට එහෙම අවුලක් නෑ.
මෙහෙම කරන්න පුළුවන්. මල්ලි මෙහෙම කරමුද? මම
ඔව්
දැන් මේක දැන් හෙට අපි කරන් ඉන්න බැට් එක මේක කන්ටිනියුේෂන් එකනේ.
ඔව්
එතකොට මේක බැලෙන්න ඕනේ. හරිද? එතකොට දැන් හෙට ලකින්ත කරන එකත් දැන් එයා 4 පටන් ගත්තොත් ඔයාලා කට්ටියට 7 වෙද්දි මේක බලලා ඉවර කරගන්න පුළුවන් නේද? දැන් ඊතුරු කැලේ නම් පොඩ්ඩයි තියෙන්නේ අත්තට. නර්ව්ස් දෙකයි ලොකුවට තියෙන්නේ. හරිද?
ඔව්
ඔයාලා
එහෙම
ඊතුරු ටික
කරන්න
බලනවා.
පුළුවන් වෙයි. ඒ වෙලාව තියෙනවා හෙට වෙලාව කියන self studies එහෙම
හරි.
තියෙනවා
හෙට
උදේ.
ඔයාලා කලින් ඉවර වෙනවද?
ඔව්
ආ. එහෙනම් ඕනේ කට්ටිය එක බලයිනේ නේද? Because for the next bat it's better if you can watch this. මේකේ අපි තියෙන මේ ටික වැදගත් වෙනවා පොඩ්ඩක්. එහෙනම් මම රෙකෝඩින් එකක් දාන්නද? මොකද ඔයාලට හොඳ දේනේ කරන්න ඕනේ මෙතන. නේද? ඔයාලගේ මේ රියල් ටයිම් පේන්නේ නැති වුණොත් එන පොඩි ප්‍රශ්නයක් තියෙනවා. එහෙම කරමුද?
හරි නේද?
හරි. ඕකේ එහෙනම් මම මෙතනින් මේක එන් කරන්න මම ඔයාලට රෙකෝඩින් එකක් දාන්නම්.
හරි thank you.
මේ හරි මල්ලි හරි.
අයියේ මේ
හරි. එහෙනම්
අයියේ
කට්ටිය යන්න.
ඔප්ටික් නර්ව්
ඔව්.
මේ ඔප්ටික් නර්ව් එකේ පටන් ගන්න තැන ඉඳන්ම වගේ දාන්න පුළුවන් වෙන්නේ.
මම ඔප්ටික් නර්ව් එකෙන් දාන්නම්. හරි.
හා
olfactory වලට ඇහුණා නේද?
ඔය ෆැක්ටරි ගෝ ෂේප් එක එහෙම එක ඒක අවුලක් නෑ.
හරි. මම ඔයාලට
අයියේ
දාන්නම් එහෙනම්.
අයියේ
ඔව්.
ඔප්ටික් olfactory tract එක මේ it's divided into like lateral strand, medial strand. So is it the like in the bat it was
ඔව්.
divided into three right? So the lateral strand is what that is going to the cerebral cortex. Like in the bat like it's divided
ඔයා
into
කියන්නේ අතන
three.
මේ
තුනකට බෙදලා වගේ නයි.
yeah. ඔව් ඒක හරි. එතන ඔයා කියන කතාව ඇත්ත. Now the medial one is the one that forms the anterior commissure and connects. So the lateral one goes to the what do you call the cortex, huh? Into the temporal lobe. What was it? Yeah, what was the thing in the bat? It said it had a separate branch for the olfactory area. No, that's the thing. So the lateral one goes to the temporal, දානකස්. Okay. හොඳයි ඒක අප
හරි.
එකක් තියෙනවා ඒකේ ගැටලුවක්. So yeah. You have any doubts here in this the whole cranial nerve thing? If anyone has any doubts, you can ask.
අයිය එතකොට අර එක පැත්තක
Or like
මීඩියල්
any.
ස්ට්‍රැයල්
Oh,
වලින් මේ එයාගේ අනිත් පැත්තේ කෝටෙක්ස් එකට යනවා එහෙම නේද?
අනිත් පැත්තේ මේ olfactory tract එකත් එක්ක එයා communicate කරනවා. So ඒකේ ඒ වගේ. Oh, now I had a picture here also. ඔයාලට මේක පේන්නේ නැහැ කියලා මට අමතක වුණා. So like
අයිය දැන් රියල් ටයිම් පේනවා ඒක.
පේනවද?
ඔව්.
ඒක පෙනි යනවා වගේ සීන් එකක් තියෙන්නේ නේද?
ඔව් දැන් නම් ප්‍රශ්නයක් නැහැ.
දැන් පේනවද?
දැන් පේනවා.
How many people are there? 25. තව එකපාරක් අපි මේක කන්ටිනියු කරමුද? ඔප්ටික් එක හරි ඉවර කරන්න. recording is there anyway නේ. මොකෝ කියන්නේ? කරමුද?
ආයමත්
ටක් ගන්න.
ඇයි මේ චුට්ට ඒ කියන්නේ චුට්ට එක මේ ඩිලේ වෙනවා. දැනට විනාඩියක්
පොඩ
ලේට්.
පොඩ ලිය වෙන්නේ නේ.
ඔව් පොඩ ඩිලේ වෙනවා අර ටිකක් වෙලා
එනම් ඕන.
යද්දි ඒක මේ එකතු වෙනවා.
හරි හරි හරි. මට මේ
මේ වෙද්දි
මේක
විනාඩියක්
තමයි
ලේට්.
මගේ කනෙක්ෂන් එක තියෙන්නේ.
කනෙක්ෂන්
ඒක
ප්‍රොබ්ලම්
තමයි
නැති
මගේ.
නිසා
අවුලක් නැහැ. මම රෙකෝඩින් එකක් දාන්න. රෙකෝඩින් එකක් දාන්න.
හරි
ප්‍රශ්න ටික තියෙන අය
හරි
අහන්නකෝ. එතකොට හරි.
අයියා අර නර්ව්ස් නෙමේ ට්‍රැක්ස්
එතකොට අර
කියලා
ආපු
කිව්ව
එක
එක
ඔව්.
ඒක
හ්ම්.
චුට්ටක් කියන්න පුළුවන්ද?
ඒක මෙහෙම නම් ඒ කියන්නේ අපි දැන් නර්ව්ස් කියලා කියන්නේ පෙරිෆරල් නර්වස් සිස්ටම් එකේ අපි සෙන්ට්‍රල් නර්වස් සිස්ටම් කියන්නේ බ්‍රේන් ඇන්ඩ් ස්පයිනල් කෝඩ්. එතකොට අපි ක්‍රේනියල් නර්ව්ස් ඇන්ඩ් ස්පයිනල් නර්ව්ස් කියන්නේ අපේ පෙරිෆරල් නර්වස් සිස්ටම් එකනේ. එතකොට අපි මේ පෙරිෆරල් නර්වස් සිස්ටම් එකේ තියෙන මේ කන්ටෙන්ට්ස් ඒ කියන්නේ අපේ නර්ව්ස් ටික certain characteristics තියෙනවා. And in central nervous system they have specific features, right? So one feature like that is the nerves, that means the peripheral nervous system, your cranial nerves and spinal nerves are myelinated by Schwann cells, and your central nervous system neurons, which are present in your nerve tracts. And central nervous system එකේ ඇතුලේ අපිට nerves නැහැනේ. Central nervous system එකේ ඇතුලේ අපිට තියෙන nerve tracts. Basically like information highways වගේ අපිට තියෙන tracts ටිකනේ. ඒ වගේ neurons තියෙන. So they are myelinated by oligodendrocytes. එතකොට central nervous system oligodendrocytes, your nerves, peripheral nervous system Schwann cells. හරිද? ඔන්න ඔකයි distinction එක. However, this optic nerve and olfactory nerve, now if you are calling them nerves, they should ideally be myelinated by Schwann cells because they are nerves, but they are actually myelinated by oligodendrocytes, which are the cells that are in central nervous system. So they are not compatible with they are not comparable with our peripheral nervous system. You can compare them more to central nervous system structures. That's why you don't call them nerves. That's why it's not good to call them nerves. Instead, they are more comparable with nerve tracts. ඒක. අන්න එහෙම තමයි ඒ සීන් එක තියෙන්නේ. හරිද? මේ දෙකේ තමයි ඔය වෙනස්කම තියෙන්නේ. තේරුණාද?
හරි අයියා තේරුණා. thank you.
හරි. තව මොනවද ප්‍රශ්න? Any problems? Very important things here. You have to know that more than olfactory nerve, your optic nerve extremely important. The pathway to draw. හරිද? ඒක පොඩ්ඩක් අඳින විදිය අනිවාර්යෙන් බලා ගන්න. pupillary reflex එක එන විදිය අනිවාර්යෙන් අඳින්න බලා ගන්න. Your innervation of the sensory innervation of the face, like ophthalmic කොතනද, maxillary කොතනද, mandibular කොතනද, ඒක අහන්න පුළුවන්, නිකන් මාක් කරන්න වගේ දෙන්න පුළුවන්. So මේ ටිකේම diagrams කියලා ඔය cat 4 එකට I think diagrams කියලා circle of Willis ඒවා වගේ තමයි තියෙන්නේ නේද? ආය මේ you know you have these very complicated kind of ones where you have your innervation to the lacrimal gland, innervation to the මොකක්ද parotid gland, submandibular, ඒ ටිකත් පොඩ්ඩක් බලා ගන්න. නිකන් essays වගේ අහන්නත් පුළුවන්. මම දැකලා තියෙන past papers වල අහලා තියෙනවා නිකන් flow chart වගේ ලියන්න. So and all these lesions in the optic tract මම ඒ ටික කියලා දෙන්න මම recording එකේ. හරි නේද? මම එනම් ඔයාලට recording එකක් කරලා දාන්න. මල්ලි අපි end කරමුද එහෙනම්?
හරි කරමු. thank you අයියේ.
හරි. හරි
මේ
මල්ලි ඔය
අයියට
අනිවාර්යෙන් බලන්න කට්ටිය. ඔව්.
හරි ඔව් මම කට්ටියට දාන්න. මේ
හරි.
thank you අයියේ.
හරි. කට්ටියටම හරි. Okay. Thank you. Good night.